Across the Fence, we'll learn about a program that impacts what we eat. It's a program that affects all of us and is likely to shape our state's economic and social policies for years to come. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. In 2009, Vermont's Farm to Plate investment program was signed into legislation. It's a 10-year plan with 3 specific goals: increase economic development in our food and farm sectors, create jobs in the food and farm economy, and improve access to healthy local foods. To find out more about Farm to Plate and how it will impact you, I'm joined by 2 guests. Erica Campbell is the Farm to Plate Program Director, and Rachel Carter is the program's Communication Director. Thanks so much for being with us. Erica, why don't you start out just to tell folks a little bit about what Farm to Plate is all about?
Yeah, well, Judy, as you said, Farm to Plate is about strengthening Vermont's food system. One of those areas, of course, is jobs. Just since Farm to Plate passed, that legislation passed in 2009, Vermont has created over 3,500 jobs in the farm and food sector. A lot of those jobs have been in farming and food manufacturing, and over 550 businesses have formed since 2009. Mm-hmm. We have a network that's implementing the Farm to Plate strategic plan. So there's 300 organizations from all over Vermont working to strengthen the food system together. Those organizations include government agencies, Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Natural Resources, Education, for example. We have nonprofit organizations. Those include NOFA Vermont, Vermont Food Bank, Vermont Land Trust. We also have UVM Extension and educational institutions, as well as private businesses. We have businesses such as Black River Produce and Kingdom Creamery that are all sort of working on different projects to strengthen the food system. Mm-hmm.
And so how do you coordinate sort of keeping all these parts moving together as one?
Well, we have different groups in Farm to Plate. So we really have the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund is the network coordinator. So we have lots of jobs to keep all the project groups moving forward and coordinated.
Mm-hmm. Now we hear phrases like local food and buy local. So how does Farm to Plate fit into the local food movement, Rachel?
Well, local food really isn't new. It's something that Vermonters have been living a local food lifestyle and driving a local economy for generations. And those traditions have really paved the way for, why the legislation would have passed the Farm to Plate investment program in the first place. Was there was already that, that trend was already there. We were already kind of doing all of that. And so Farm to Plate is the ability to pull that work together and identify where are there gaps so that we can really make bigger food systems change. And when you think of local food, also local food, as defined by Farm to Plate and the state of Vermont, is food produced or processed in Vermont plus 30 miles of the border. So if you're in White River Junction, mm-hmm. that would include New Hampshire, just to define that local.
And I think we have a still that we can look at that sort of illustrates what that looks like. We're going to take a peek at. Now you brought a diagram. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, as Rachel was saying, our food system affects everything. It affects health, it affects the economy, it affects the communities we live in, it affects the environment. Currently, the industrial food system is pretty out of balance. It's causing, some problems for our working landscape and for health and all these areas. And so a local food system is trying to bring balance back to that and make positive impacts in those areas. Mm-hmm. So production starts with farming inputs. So all of the things that go into farming, including land and soil. Production in the Farm to Plate strategic plan covers all sorts of components of production, from maple to dairy to vegetables. So we really looked at all types of production. And then food has to be stored and move to the consumer. So we have wholesale distribution and retail distribution where it's actually sold. And then consumption, the consumers really drive this whole cycle. They create the demand and they really make the whole local food system work. And then there's nutrient management. So of course we want to capture any byproducts post-consumer and move into nutrient management, and that kind of closes the loop on the whole system.
So it sounds like this sort of thing was happening in different pockets, in different parts of the state, very locally. Mm-hmm. And what this movement now does is to sort of get a whole statewide system in place so that it can be a little bit more smooth, that some producers in one part of the state can get their product to another part of the state.
And so the efforts aren't duplicate. You know, if there's something going on in one part of the state and then another organization wants to do the same thing, they can talk to each other and collaborate, you know, and make those efforts kind of across the board.
I mentioned in the beginning there are three main goals of Farm to Plate. Can you talk a little bit about the goals and the overall objectives of the Farm to Plate strategic plan? I don't know what to start off. You can.
Well, and when you were looking at that diagram and all of the different components of the food system, so the plan delves into those different components. So there's the overarching goals, which you had mentioned before, with the jobs and economic impact and local food access. But then there's 25 goals to reach those overarching goals, and those are based on different parts of the food system working together.
Yeah, and so we have the network is trying to reach all these goals. So we're working. There's actually 27 groups in the network that are all working on different projects throughout the food system to help us reach these goals. I mean, to give a couple examples, we have the Food Cycle Coalition. They're working on our nutrient management goal. We have legislation passed a couple of years ago called Act 148. It's universal recycling, and there's an organics component to that, where we're really trying to move organics out of the landfill, food scraps and things like that, for example. And there's a hierarchy that the Food Cycle Coalition's working on that includes food rescue as actually the highest and best use, and then compost and other uses as well. Another example is farm to institution. I mean, Vermont's really been a leader in farm to institution for years. We're really trying to really make a bigger dent in how much local food gets into institutions. We're working with big food service companies like Sodexo, for example. They're working to actually measure how much local food and increase that every year. They're currently at 15% local food. So it starts to make a big difference when there's that many meals served around the state.
Yeah, it does. And so can you give me talk a little bit about how Farm to Plate is going to get to 2020, because it sounds like there's a lot of work that has to be done.
There certainly is, and there's a lot of work that's being done. So Erica had mentioned there's the 300 different organizations that make up the Farm to Plate network, and these different groups and projects, some of which she had mentioned. So there's definitely work that's happening within the network, these kind of bringing together multiple organizations and businesses to work on some of these goals. And then there's also many of these organizations and government agencies have been working on Farm to Plate goals long before Farm to Plate existed. So they're continuing, you know, that work. And so we're tracking both the bigger projects that take the network kind of collaboration model, and then also the different projects that just individual organizations are working on. One of the goals is to double local food consumption by 2020, so double the amount of local food that Vermonters consume. In 2010, that was measured at 5% based on sales, and then we want to get that to 10% by 2020. So I spoke to a class in Danville a couple weeks ago and asked them, how much local food do you think we eat? 85%. and they were baffled to see that where it was at. And on the Farm to Plate's website, the Vermont Food System Atlas, that's where we track all of these different goals and how we're going to get to 2020. So we can see that there.
And so the atlas itself, that just helps keep track of where things are happening, or you can take a look at it maybe. The next one I believe shows the atlas. Yeah,
the atlas it's Vermont's. It's Farm to Plate's website, and so there's a couple of pages on that atlas. So there's the goals for getting to 2020. Sorry, I was looking at the piece. So there's 4 kind of components on the atlas. You've got the strategic plan. So the entire plan is on the atlas. You've got all the network communication and all the activities happening with the different projects. You've got the getting to 2020, and if folks went to that site, they could see all of the different goals and how the progress is being tracked. And then there's the actual atlas component, which is a mapping interface that really covers all food and farm sector for Vermont. It's kind of like a Google for Vermont's food system. And
so you can look up different sources?
Yeah, so farmers, producers, businesses, service providers, financial lenders are all on there. So you can search for those, and farmers and producers can search for those to find kind of the technical assistance and things that they need to move forward in their own individual work.
How about educating the consumer? Because I think that's sort of the big picture too, is get consumers on board And a lot of people are, as far as wanting to eat local and knowing where their food comes from. But there is a lot of education, perception-wise, that I think needs to take place. When you were talking to that group, saying how much, of our food is local. And people think it's a lot more than it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, education is really important to make all of this work. The food system is very complex, and lots of different impacts that can come out of that. We have obesity epidemics in this country. There's lots of issues. And, we really, getting people more connected with the food that they eat really makes a big difference on their food choices, ultimately. So the more, that consumers, know their farmer and are part of their local food system, the more apt they're likely to make good food choices. Food access is another really important goal of Farm to Plate. And I had shown that food system diagram in the beginning, but we really have these key cross-cutting issues that cut through that, including climate change and environment, and food access is a really huge one because we want local food to be affordable and accessible to people. And Vermont has some amazing programs that all throughout the state. Farm to Plate's working on a lot of work right now to get local food into retail stores. It's where most Vermonters shop. Vermonters shop at grocery stores for the most part, and also convenience stores and sort of stores farther out where that's the most accessible for people. So getting some fresh vegetables and produce into those kind of stores. Organizations throughout Vermont, such as the Food Bank, they're doing lots of gleaning programs.
Yeah, can you explain what gleaning is?
Yeah, so gleaning is really taking the surplus that comes from farms and moving that into the charitable food system. So lots of farmers, depending on what's happening with their crops, they won't be able to market all of their crops. So there's excess sometimes, and there'll be volunteer gleaning crews that come into farms and get that extra harvest and move it out into different distribution systems to food shelves and the food bank.
And it's food that's perfectly fine, but it might not be the food that gets picked to take to a farmer's market that looks picture perfect that people want to buy.
Yep, or it just could be that they have too much of that crop at this time of year. So that's and there's a couple other programs. One in particular that I just find so wonderful is the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps has a program called Healthcare Shares. Essentially, the farm is growing vegetables for doctors who then prescribe it to patients.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
that's
it's a
neat.
really unique model. It's kind of a veggie prescription program. So
what a good idea.
Yeah, it's a newer model. So we're hoping that expands throughout the state.
So how does Farm to Plate impact someone with a vegetable garden or a hunter or someone whom local food isn't really a catchphrase but a way of life?
Well, and again, Vermonters have been living this local food lifestyle for so long, and if it wasn't for those folks paving the way through generations and through the values in the working landscape, Farm to Plate wouldn't have come to light. I mean, we're really trying to promote a healthy society, and the more people who are connected to their food in whatever way that matters to them, the more important that's going to be. And then you also look at the supply and demand and the driving the local food economy. And so if there's ways to look at the amount of money that you spend on food that you're not necessarily growing or gathering or hunting yourself, and seeing if there's some percentage of your budget that can go towards purchasing local. I mean, we look at a lot of if it's not local, it's regional. Some folks will focus on, okay, well, if it's not local, then I shouldn't just get it anywhere. Maybe asparagus is asparagus now, it's in season, but it's not in season maybe yet here, but it is in New Jersey. That's maybe better than buying something that's coming from Mexico or California or Venezuela. So there's a lot of different pieces like that.
So it's a lot of education again.
A lot of education, and we're hoping to launch a local food campaign within the next year or a little bit following that, where we could really do a statewide kind of drive to try to move that 5 to 10% dial. So maybe it's, does 10% of your food purchases come from purchasing local and supporting the local economy?
What do you think from what you hear from consumers and feedback and so forth? It sounds like there really is a segment, a lot of people want this to happen, but maybe just don't know how to get from step A to step B to say, well, if where is my food coming from? Where is this asparagus coming from? And did you ask the store manager, or is it signage? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of that, all of that. The signage is huge. Where it's accessible, like I said, it's got to be in grocery stores eventually if we want this to be accessible to everyone. So there's and we need to get the word out to more consumers.
Okay. Well, to learn more about the Farm to Plate strategic plan through the website on your screen, it's vtfoodatlas.com. The site has links to many of the topics that we've talked about today, as well as programs on and off the farm that use food to strengthen our local economy. I want to thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Judy.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.